Thanks.
Josh, it's great to meet you, and thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Yes, I'm excited. My first question for you is, what's your relationship with the horror genre?
I love horror movies. I've loved them since I was a kid, and I feel that horror movies were some of the most sort of formative cinematic experiences for me in the theater. I remember like the first Conjuring came out when I was, I think, 16, and kids were daring each other to go see it. And I just loved how communal of an experience it was and um, how much of a balance there was between laughing and screaming. And so I think I've been obsessed with it forever. And making my first movie as a horror movie, I felt like there was an opportunity to both deliver a kind of satisfying horror experience for an audience and tell a very meaningful, sort of personal story within that.
You've mentioned movies like A Nightmare on Elm Street and The Shining. I'm wondering what kind of horror scares you the most?
I'm a big fan of suspense, really, and I think that widens the net beyond horror as well.
Mhm.
And I think a film like The Wages of Fear is so scary in that primal part of your body. For me, it really started with Jaws, which I saw when I was 3 years old in a small town in India. My grandfather was the only person in our town with a VCR, and that was the first film he showed me. And I think I've always been into this kind of very primal, suspenseful fear, very much building on the fear of the dark, the fear of something kind of right behind you, and you can't turn around to look, and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. So horror for me really comes from that place of how can we tap into the most universal sort of primal fears possible.
Did it give you a fear of swimming?
Jaws did not give me a fear of swimming, but it did give me a fear of bathtubs. I don't know why, because there are no bathtubs in the movie, but I used to have this insane anxiety that the bottom of my bathtub would fall out and a shark would come eat me. And recently I felt like I'd gotten over all that, but I swam in a lake by myself, and it was a very murky lake, and I never have a fear of the ocean, nothing like that. But this very sort of primal fear kicked in, and I was 20 feet from the shore all by myself, and I was like, in the time it takes me to swim back to shore, I'm going to get eaten for sure. So it's crazy how you reconnect with those primal fears sometimes as well.
Definitely. What would you say your relationship with the supernatural is?
This particular movie came from some of the stories that I heard growing up. My grandfather, for example, had a story about how he dealt with a mysterious supernatural entity, and that actually kind of became the genesis of this film. And so for me, the supernatural is a great way of talking about shared fears. And it was one of the reasons that I felt like we could do a cultural horror movie about the Indian mythology that would really resonate everywhere, because there are, again, going back to those primal fears, these ghost stories, the supernatural stories that we pass down from generation to generation. I feel like they're consolidating these fears. I mean, for example, the fear of whistling, which is not a major fear in the West, but after you've seen this movie, hopefully it's something you're afraid of. So I think supernatural, the stories that we tell each other are a great way to communicate on that very universal level of primal fear.
What about on a personal level? Do you believe in ghosts or anything in that realm?
I guess I would say that I'm agnostic to it. I don't know that I've ever had personal experience with any beings, but I do find that there's just a whole world beyond our normal sort of comprehension. And I think it's really what excites me about movies, both in the sort of sci-fi genre and the horror genre, that they're dealing with things beyond the physical, the right here three-dimensional reality. And so I think that there's something, I don't know that I can classify it beyond that, but I love exploring it in movies because we can really give it a visual form when we do that.
I think I've read you talk about exploring, like creating a bit of an iconic horror character of your own. Do you think that this film has franchise potential?
I would love to continue the story of this film, but in a roundabout way, I'd never planned for a sequel when I wrote it. The ending is left open, but for me, it ends in a very kind of closed way for the themes of the film, what the film is about, and Sam's character arc, and even the title lives inside. For me, it's self-contained, but working with these actors and bringing their kind of family to life and their characters, that's what towards the end of the process got me very excited about hopefully continuing the story, because we do leave in a place of a fair amount of uncertainty for our main character. And I would love to continue that story and continue her specific journey of learning to live with what happens to her at the end of the film.
I mean, there's so much interesting stuff there for a prequel because there's so much scary stuff that happens before we enter the picture. Has that ever crossed your mind for future stories?
For future stories, absolutely, because really what's fascinating about the structure of this movie for me and the themes that is about kind of going back to your roots is an investigation into one's roots, right? And so whether it's a prequel or a sequel, I think continuing the story really is about digging deeper into the past. And we answer very little of where this creature comes from, what its origins are. And however we continue the story, I think that's one of the most exciting parts for me, is tracing that origin even further back, because we tease so many things in this film.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I love high school set stories. There's some of my favorites out there, especially in the horror genre. I'm wondering, what was your high school experience like?
I certainly don't think my high school experience was disastrous or catastrophic, but what felt so normal to me, and that's part of what I was trying to capture, and the reason that I wanted to do a high school movie, is that there is a kind of homogenous, normal experience that people have with high school. But it's only when I got to college that I looked back on high school and understood that I felt different, and I felt sort of isolated in certain ways. And the acceptance that I gained in college and the self-acceptance that I found for my own culture helped me look at high school in a way where I was like, oh, there were these things going on, and there were no malicious characters, no malicious actors within that. And everybody in high school feels different in one way or another, but that can kind of destroy your sense of self, or it can sort of reinforce your sense of self. And so this movie, when I was coming up with it, it was so important to do a high school movie, because that's when identity feels most malleable. That's when it felt most malleable to me. And looking back on it, I'm glad that I learned the things that I did, but I also probably wouldn't want to do it again, if I'm being honest with you.
That's fair. It's probably too scary and too intense to truly be considered young adult horror. But I'm wondering, do you have any like favorite references for high school TV shows or movies? Like for me, Buffy was a really big one. And
Yeah, for
I
sure.
felt some of that in this film. I'm wondering, do you have any favorite teen TV shows?
Well, I think one of the things you brought up, which is very interesting, is the scare sort of factor. And I agree with you that we do push it beyond what I imagine a lot of teen-specific horror movies push it to. But it does make me think that what was exciting to me as a teenager, as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, was something that pushed the boundaries without necessarily becoming gratuitous or graphic. And I think that's the zone we were aiming for, that kids could go see the movie and kind of feel like they saw something a little bit taboo, a little bit farther than the line that they're used to, but that they can still feel safe within it. It was the zone that I was trying to land in. And in terms of teen stuff, I mean, there's so much good stuff, but really, as much as this movie is a love letter to the 80s horror movies, it's also a love letter to the 80s teen movies, right? I mean, The Karate Kid is one of my favorite films of all time. Clueless, for example, there's such great location movies. There's such great sort of social hangout movies, Dazed
Yeah.
and Confused. And then I just love when the two genres can really get bridged. Two of my favorite examples are Ginger Snaps and Christine, the John Carpenter Christine, right? I mean, those were movies I was watching over and over because they felt so truthful to the teenage experience, and yet were such compelling sort of horror experiences as well. So that was really that target range I was aiming for.
I love that you brought up Ginger Snaps. That's one of my favorites. Just curious, have you ever had the chance to seek out the sequels?
Yes, I like the sequels, but I don't know that they have that same sort of clarity that the first one has, but I do
Oh,
like all the
not at
sequels.
all.
But it's interesting how some of these franchises evolve. Like, I just love when you can take those swings. Like, I love the Hellraiser sequels. They take swings and they go places, and it's fun. I like the McConaughey Texas Chainsaw. Like, I like when
Yeah.
you can take. I love New Nightmare. It's possibly my favorite of the series. So I love when you can take swings with the sequels. But some of those first movies are just there's so much packed into them, whether it's Nightmare or Ginger Snaps, there's so much packed into them that you feel like you want to keep exploring that world, right?
There feels like maybe a little bit of Hellraiser in this story. Have you ever seen, I think it's number 8, Hell World? I just like bringing it up whenever I get a
Oh
chance.
man, I
It's
don't think I've
nonsense.
seen Hell World. I might have to check that out immediately
Yeah,
after this. How
very
is it?
silly. Oh, insane and ridiculous, which
Amazing.
that's
That's
for
what we
me.
like.
I find protagonists are really tough to get right, and I was really impressed with Sam. She was really fun to hang out with. How similar is she to you?
I mean, I'm certainly not a teenage girl, and I've never been, but in writing the script, I was really basing it off of some stories that I had heard from friends or family, from my partner, and I felt like when we were developing the sort of core story, I was developing it with my friend Ashish, who wrote the story with me. We were trying to figure out like what is the real fear here? What is this sort of core horror? And it felt like part of it was this sort of fear of being under a gaze. And it felt like who better to kind of experience that than this particular character. And she's not necessarily like me, but I think that she has this always from the script and then the way Megan Suri brought her to life. There's this balance, right? There's this competing impulse. One is to embrace and the other is to reject. And she's kind of doing this back and forth throughout every situation she's in the movie. And I just felt like that was such an interesting conflict. And it was always a question for her of how far can we go, because we don't want to make her this sort of scrubbed down, uninteresting character. How far can we go in having her do unlikable things, but still make the foundation of the character strong enough that the audience is going to come back and say, this is our heroine. We care about her. We want her to grow from her mistakes.
I hope we get to hang out with her again. What was it like premiering at South by Southwest?
It was incredible. I mean, it's such a great audience and such a welcoming and embracing audience for horror films. And we've had such great luck with the festivals that we've been to across the rest of the year. We played at the Calgary Underground Film Festival. We played at Overlook, which was amazing in New Orleans. And we played at so many fun ones, Fantasia, Fright Fest. And it's just been so incredible to watch the film reach that wider audience, and different cultures get to see it. We showed it at the Neuchatel Film Festival in Switzerland. So all of these experiences, starting from South by Southwest, it's given me such a new appreciation for people who love movies and the ways that they engage with movies.
Do you use a letterbox account?
I don't personally.
Okay, well, I have to ask if like you were forced to give an answer to what your top 4 films would be, could you do that?
Yeah. I recently came up with a top 4, but only in like this was my top 4 today. So I'll give you that response. It was Bong Joon-ho's Memories of Murder, and then it was De Palma's Blowout, and there was one more. I think it was The Vanishing, the 1988, the
Ooh,
British film, and then it
scary.
was Ratatouille, which I love. So there's it's a
Wow,
weird
it's a
little top
diverse
4,
group.
but those are films I love to death.
Those are beautiful films. Well, it was really awesome getting the chance to speak with you today. Congrats on your film, and I'm excited for the world to check it out.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate chatting with you.
It was great meeting you.